Okay, I'm going to begin. Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you very much for joining us on this International Women's Day 2021. We have a particularly exciting event for you today that I think cuts across two very important cross sections in global governance and the wider challenges to the role of women in peace and security. And that is because we are joined by not only leading female advocates and leaders of thought in the areas of global governance and conflict resolution, but also we're joined by women who have proven themselves also as youth leaders and who have sought in their work and in their advocacy to inspire young women around the world to act in the name of peace and security. So I'm very happy that you, three of you, can join us today, and we are delighted to host you and to talk to you about your experiences and your thoughts about women's advocacy and women's rights on this special day for the next hour. The event is going to take place in basically two parts. So we are first going to have a dialogue with the participants here, and then we're going to, in the second half, take up some of the questions that we have been supplied with. So we put out a call for questions about 2 weeks ago, and we received an overwhelming response. So we feel that the appetite for this panel is very much in the audience, and we look forward to engaging those questions in the second half of the event. If you have further questions, you can always pop them into the chat box, and I'll do my best to try to ask as many as possible. So without further ado, I'm going to move along now to introducing our participants. Beginning with Fleur Ravensberger, she is the Assistant Director and co-founder of the Dialogue Advisory Group. Since 2009, she's been working in conflict mediation, initiating and engaging in talks with armed groups to reduce violence, including in Iraq and the Democratic Republic of Congo. She was part of a small team which disarmed groups in Northern Ireland and the Basque Country, and periodically teaches, speaks and appears in the media to discuss current affairs and issues related to this work. We're also joined by Christina Petcu. She's a research associate with the Just Security 2020 project at the Simpson Center in Washington, D.C. A native of Romania, she has received a master's in international affairs from the New School and a degree in philosophy and European studies from the University of Barcelona. Prior to joining the Simpson Center, she served in various roles at the UN, including the UN Office on Drugs and Crime in Guatemala, the Department of Peacekeeping Operations at the UN Headquarters, and UN Habitat. Her work and research interests focus on global governance, strengthening civil society's role in global governance, the management of armed groups, and advancing the UN's Youth, Peace and Security agenda, among other policy issues. She's an alumna of the One Young World Foundation, very familiar to those of you in The Hague, of course, and currently co-chairs the UN 2020 Coalition's Advocacy Working Group. We're also delighted to be joined today by Ms. Aya Chebi, the activist, peacebuilder and diplomat. She's a multi-award-winning Pan-African feminist who rose to prominence as a voice for democracy as a political blogger during the 2010-2011 Tunisian revolution. She received the 2019 Gates Foundation Campaign Award and was named in Forbes Africa 50 Most Powerful Women, a New African magazine list of 100 most influential Africans. She served as the first ever African Union Special Envoy on Youth and the youngest diplomat at the African Union Commission's chairperson's cabinet. She has mobilised youth around the Youth Silencing the Guns campaign, which has become the African Union's largest youth campaign and main platform on youth, peace and security. In her role, she also has widely mobilised young women, resulting in the first of its kind Africa Young Women Manifesto. She has curated internationally the acclaimed concept of intergenerational co-leadership. And that's particularly fascinating because you see now we have 3 young women who have, each in their own area, really proven to have incredibly initiative-driven leadership capacities. And really hope to get into how that has been experienced for them in these global governance questions in recent years. So I'd just like to come to you a little bit first to kind of get the discussion going. If we start with you, Christina, can you tell us how you got into this role? You've obviously had a variety of positions, both in think tanks, but also at the UN. So what drew you really to youth advocacy and women's advocacy?
Thank you, Professor O'Malley, and happy International Women's Day to everyone, and really thanks to Leiden University and UN Youth Impact for inviting me to celebrate this day with you and share this space for discussion with, I would say, 3 stellar women peace builders. I'm extremely grateful for that. For me, I think the path has always been very straightforward from early on, meaning that I've always had an idea that while I was a citizen in papers, a Romanian citizen, I always felt that deep down I was rather a global citizen, and my purpose was to serve humanity rather than serve just the people, and that is, of course, regardless of skin color, socioeconomic environment, and it was a very natural path for me, in the sense that the United Nations, for instance, was that kind of institution, multilateral institution that I was reaching towards. And in doing so, of course, I've tried to immerse myself into work that pertained to international relations, but not only. I think that's something that I have faced in the European context, and in Romania in particular, is an educational system that it's very theory-based. So I tried to always look for that sort of critical thinking and applied practice by volunteering, and that happened at the beginning for me with ISEC, and that's where I actually also developed my interest in youth, and I understood the power of youth, the capacity of youth to, of course, become peace builders, but also to contribute in their societies. So I would say that was kind of the starting point for my career, and then from then on, it was just a matter of setting goals and being sufficiently driven and disciplined to go through them. And then I think that's on the other side, in terms of because this is International Women's Day, and we're speaking about women, I think another side of it is that when you tend to grow up in a more traditional society, which I did, I'm coming from a very small rural village of Romania, women tend to be seen as definitely persons who should build a home, who should have their children, who should have a career, definitely. But at the same time, not necessarily aim too big. Definitely my intentions to go and serve in conflict-affected countries seemed a little bit outrageous to many of my compatriots. Though now I think that it's a kind of it's easy for them to assimilate. So from then on, I just pursued that, and now I'm as you said, working at the Stimson Center, which is a Washington-based think tank, where I'm working on basically global governance reform, and more particularly, we're working on the United Nations reform, covering the 3 pillars of the United Nations. We're covering a large set of thematic areas, but that allowed me the opportunity to look holistically at the intersection between issues such as violent conflict, inequality, gender equality, climate change, and other transnational challenges. And in 2020, we gave special attention to influencing the preparations, including the political declaration that was adopted for the 75th anniversary of the United Nations. And this declaration includes 12 commitments, ranging from preventing conflict to gender equality. So what we're trying to do basically this year and moving forward is to just ensure that that declaration is not just a statement by member states, but that it's implemented and taken forward. And I'm just going to leave it here for now.
Right. Well, that's a terrific overview, and it really gives us something to think about, and something that I've always wondered about is the real commitment of the UN and regional organizations and member states to really advancing the role of women, but also to embracing the voice of youth. So maybe I could turn to you, Aya, and ask you to tell us a little bit more about how you became the first African Union Youth Envoy, and what was that process like? How did you, how was it that the African Union decided that they needed a youth envoy, and what did you do with that role? What did it mean to be really at the table for a very important and powerful regional organization?
Thank you so much, and happy International Women's Day to all of you, amazing women, strong, powerful, badass women, those in the panel, but also those watching us. This is our day, but every day should be our day, and we should just try to amplify what young women on the front line are doing during this month. So I'm really happy to be here, and I want to really thank Leiden University, Hague University, but also especially the UN Youth Impact, because it's a youth-led, and I think I really accepted this because it's youth-led, and it's important to support platforms that are led by young women, that are led by young people, because we're talking about peace and security. We're the most affected by it. Conflict has a youth face. Refugees have a youth face. Displaced have a youth face. Migrants have a youth face. So we're not talking about issues that are distant from us. That's why most of young people are also frustrated about, tokenism of intergovernmental space, because some people sit, in capitals and analyze situations in conflict settings and humanitarian settings, and young people are saying, this is my daily life, this is a matter of survival to me. And then when we are invited to those spaces, usually it's tokenistic, and usually it's also a free service. So you are the expert on the ground, you are the one going through it, you have the solution because you understand the context. Then you're invited to these spaces to give a background and share your experience. And I think this is what we need to do as young people, as UN Youth Impact, as an organization that is also engaging the UN, is to change these spaces to be having more meaningful engagement. And I think that's what took me to the African Union. I come from a very revolutionary activist background. I was part of the revolution in my country, which was the first 21st century peaceful revolution. We protested for 28 days. We kicked out a dictator of 23 years, and we have been part as millennials of the democratization of our country. And so for me, after 8 years of that Pan-African activism, because I've been there around the continent also supporting youth movements, it was a tough decision, to say, okay, I'm noisy outside of the establishment and I'm trying to push change from outside, and now I'm going to have a space inside the system, which I think demands different tools, different strategies, demands a lot of skill for consensus, for diplomacy. And I was up for the challenge because there is no young people, let alone young women, in those spaces. And when I got in, I found myself most often the only young female on the table. And I think it is important. I think now I see myself more of value to activism than I was before, because now I understand why we go on the streets, we protest, we make noise, we risk our lives for our freedom, and things are not changing. Things are not changing with the speed we want. Conflict are not reducing with the ambition we want. Peace is not sustainable as we want. And we ask ourselves as youth movement, why is that? We put our guts, our own resources, our passion into it, and then a lot of young people are even, a lot of activists are even depressed or burned out from the injustice, the reality we live in. And I think we need to now start thinking about introspect, in retrospect, reflecting on what is actually not working. How can we get massively young people into these spaces, massively young women into these leadership spaces, not the only and first youth female envoy, not the only young minister or youngest parliamentarian. We need to get out of these exceptions and really become the mainstream. And I think that's when we're going to disrupt at massive scale the agenda. So it's been a journey, 2 years of a marathon to open, the space at an institution like the African Union, 55 member states, with an average age of African leaders of 64 years old. So I had a lot of conversations with old men who, don't understand why you should engage your youthful population. So those are my daily, challenging conversations. And I hope I made at least some change, whether at policy level, whether on those one-on-one conversation with these leaders, or whether in mobilizing and bringing young people to the table so we can open more space.
Terrific. That sounds like an absolutely fascinating and extremely unique experience to bring to bear. And I hope that we get a little bit more chance to talk about that. I wanted to come to something related and come to you, Fleur, in your experience in working in peace and conflict security challenges, and what kind of challenges you've faced as a female leader in conflict zones working on peace and security and disarmament. As a woman, where is the difficulty in that in your experience?
Thanks so much, Alana. And I just want to join Christina and Aya in saying Happy International Women's Day to you all. I have to say, before I answer that question or attempt to, Alana, I'm really grateful to be here with Christina and Aya and you, Alana, but also with this audience of women, because I think we need it. I'm not sure I belong in the young group anymore. I'm 37, I have 4 kids, but I've been doing this since I was 25, and some things have gotten a little bit better, but a lot of things have not. And I'm really grateful that we can be together and talk about that, because there's a lot to be done. In terms of your question, I think there is a lot to say. So just to give a bit of background, what I do on a daily basis is I work in a not-for-profit organization based in Amsterdam. I co-founded it. I'm deputy director there. What we do is we facilitate dialogue in armed conflict. We pick up on a small focused part of an existing peace process, because we're small, we're only 15 people. In the triangle between government representatives, armed groups, and international organizations. That's essentially who we engage with. And the goal is always to reduce violence. But what that means in practice is very different. We've done 2 disarmaments in Europe, one in Northern Ireland and one in Basque Country. But we also have much work outside of Europe. For example, we work in Yemen on trying to make the ceasefire negotiations more inclusive, which in the room has been quite difficult, but there is a whole sustainable future that needs to be built that is beyond that room. We do some work in Libya where we talk to Islamist groups and plug them into the peace conversation, essentially, because part of our theory of change is that you talk to the people who commit the violence and you make space for change by engaging with them, when I think others who do more advocacy work, which I think is very important, are more pointing out what needs to change. We engage with those who have behavior that is violent. That's kind of what we do. My own role in that is really hands-on. So yes, I engage in running the organization with other people at DOG, but I spend at least half my time on the dialogues, meaning if we don't have the pandemic, which pray that is over soon, it means I go to wherever it is that we are working to facilitate a roundtable conversation or to engage with elements of the parties in the conflict who are fighting each other. Yeah, in terms of why women, peace, and security is so important to me, I think you just said that you engage a lot with men of a certain age. At least I'm hoping in your case, most of them aren't white. But I very much relate to that experience. And I think many women in our field. And the fact that I'm able to be in that room, I think reflects my privilege. I've had a lot of choices. I've had a lot of opportunities. And not everybody has those. And so I think my main thing really with this subject isn't so much about peace and security necessarily, because that's where I ended up. And I think that's incredibly fascinating and important, but it's more about equal participation for me and equal opportunities and choices. It's not for me to say what those are, but I really want all of those women who are now coming to power and positions to have those choices, whatever those are. They can be not to be in those positions.
Right, and thanks. And that brings us kind of really nicely to the whole question of the Women, Peace and Security agenda. We've just had 20 years in 3 months now of Women, Peace and Security. And the question I think on a lot of people's lips on this International Women's Day is, what has peace and security done for women? The WPS agenda, and have we really seen the kind of advances that we were promised back in 2000? Christina, can you tell us something about that from your perspective? What has the WPS agenda achieved in this time, and where has it failed?
Yeah, sorry. Definitely, I think we are able to see some advancement because of the agenda. And I'm going to speak very briefly about a little bit of data on this. And I think one of the main contributions, of course, as we're seeing, and sorry for bringing the discussion back to the UN, but I think this is the key institution that we have to look at. This is also my main area of expertise, of course, but this is where the Women, Peace and Security Resolution was adopted more than 20 years ago now. So I think it is important to look a little bit of how the UN changed in that perspective and how the UN was able to implement also change on the ground and how member states reacted to that resolution. And what I could say from the data is that as of October 2020, we have seen that 88 countries and territories have national action plans on women, peace and security. That is about close to half of the UN's membership. So we're not there yet, but I'm trying to emphasize a little bit of positive results. We are seeing though an increase from 53 national action plans in 2015 to 19 in 2020. And we're also seeing these changes particularly taking place in the European Union and also in the African Union. We have also seen especially over the past few years with Secretary General Antonio Guterres emphasis on his gender parity strategy. We have seen that this has also yielded positive results. And of course, this goes back to the Women, Peace and Security agenda. And as of 2020, women accounted for 41% of senior leadership positions in special political missions and peacekeeping operations led by the UN. That is an increase of 21% in 2017 when the strategy was launched. So we can definitely say that we're seeing some positive results here as well. In terms of really space, and when we speak about participation and having more women at the table, we have also seen in 2019, we have had 39% of the speakers of the security that briefed the Security Council were women. This is a breaking record from previous statistics where we have had, for instance, about 20% of women briefing the Security Council. In addition to that, I think we have also seen legislation being passed both at the international level, but also at the national level that not only relate, when we speak about women, peace and security, I think we're speaking about more than just having women at the table in peace negotiations, which, by the way, that's also an area who has made some advancements, however, is not sufficient. So, for instance, now we're seeing that only 13% of women are negotiators in peace processes, which is very, very low rates. But we have also seen that other issues have been brought up and more normative and normative changes, reforms, and institutions and policies have been able to be implemented in this regard. And I'm thinking here about policies and laws that have to do with sexual and reproductive health rights, with gender-based violence, with women empowerment and economic opportunities, with access to education for girls. I think we have been able to shine a light on these other issues through the Women, Peace and Security agenda. The Women, Peace and Security agenda is not an agenda for women necessarily, it's an agenda for peace. If we have peace and if we empower women, then we're going to be able to have peace.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of the things that you said there are interesting, and the UN seems to be going at a glacial pace, but roughly in the right direction with representation. But there's a lot of people that would say that actually that those statistics really relate only to the position of women at top levels, and then actually in the middle levels and the lower levels of the UN, where you're talking about women who are really in the field and really in influential positions with local community, that there really isn't a lot of that the UN has done to actually promote their leadership. But you touched on something else that I really wanted to come back to, and that's, you talked about how men can facilitate the role of women. And I wanted to ask Aya a little bit more about that in your experience. So you talked about kind of being confronted with these relatively elderly African statesmen and trying to kind of get them to think about the role of youth. In your experience, were there things that your male colleagues at the African Union did, or that particular kind of diplomats that you were working with did to help you to advance in your agenda on youth as a woman in situations where you were facing great stereotypes and facing kind of discrimination and prejudice from statesmen and women who really, or statesmen mostly, who are not used to or kind of don't engage with young women leaders on a regular basis? And I think this goes, by the way, for most of the countries in the world, certainly even in Western Europe, this would be a reality of policy making. So how did you face down those challenges, if you like, in your role?
Yeah, very, 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 very important question. I actually, I'm trying to write a reflection on the past 2 years and how it was perceived in the intergovernmental space. And I remember there was this time where I had a one-on-one bilateral with the head of state, and I had two young men on my team. So it was him, tete-a-tete, and he had a team of two other men next to him, and I had two guys next to me. We were on a table face to face, and we were having a conversation, right? And I was talking him straight to the face, and when he responds to me, he looks at the young man next to me, and he couldn't even make eye contact directly with me. And of course, as a female, what I see is I'm like, it's either I'm not worth of, leadership in this space, that I'm undermined, or is it that, men can get intimidated by a young female being in leadership, or is it just cultural, and it's just a sign of respect. So I get sometimes confused with all of this because I am strongly, proudly feminist, and I analyze everything around me, around my gender, because whether we like it or not, it's my daily experience. I go on the bus, I go to the workplace, I go on the street. I'm defined by my gender, but how I look like, what I wear, how I behave. And I think that's where men need to be educated, how they, also behave in the intergovernmental space. And of course, I had a lot of women, elder women, who really paved the way for me. I don't think I would be even the first youth envoy to be a female if wasn't for the parity in the African Union Commission, where now we have equal commissioners, men and women, 4-4. We had a lot of also women at the director level. So now we have parity as a policy. So I don't think this would have been a possibility before. And I think the credit goes to both the women movement who pushed for it, but also the men who were in leadership in the African Union who also, we got their buy-in and they pushed for it to become a reality. So I think that's what I see men support comes in. In terms of, which is a concept I also pushed for the past 2 years, what I call intergenerational co-leadership, because I don't believe in a youth space only and the decision makers who are older only. Yes, young women need their own space. Yes, young people need their own space to talk, to organize. But I think more and more what is needed, and the gap that we're not talking about, is the generational gap, which is in a governance gap, which is a gap in even now dealing with the pandemic. It's a gap in everything. And we don't talk about much, but especially in Africa, because we are the youngest population in the world. And maybe to your first question, why we have a youth envoy, makes absolute sense. We're 65% of the population under the age of 30. We're the youngest in the world, and we're gonna double by the end of the century. Half of the world will be African. So if we don't deal with this generational gap, it's going to be a crisis. It is already a crisis, because all these young people going to the streets protesting is because of youth unemployment. They're not in leadership, they're excluded, they're marginalized, and so on. So for me, the philosophy of intergenerational co-leadership is that you're not just passing the torch to us. It's not like you delivered and now it's like our turn to do. No, we have to do it together, because whatever shit we are in right now, it's a generational. We're inheriting generational injustices, and we need generational accountability. And we can't do it alone as millennials. You can't throw all this responsibility on us and you want us to do magic and save the world. And we can't blame you for also inheriting other injustices. So the idea is that we need to work together across generations. We need to have young people co-chair these meetings. We need to have young people as special advisors to the president at presidential level. We need to have young people in parliamentary seats. And so when we collaborate, you understand our language, we understand yours, we communicate better, we learn from you, we get mentored by just observing you. And I think that's something I've learned myself. I was really surrounded by elder women, and I was just observing how they navigate the space. And that was such a learning for me every day. And also the feminist men in the institution. Yeah, I mean, there were a lot of gatekeepers who would close the door, even if I'm the envoy, and they would, because of how I look and because of how young I am, they would not allow me in the space, even if I have that title. And it is the elder men and women who have that respect and who have that credibility who bring me in. And then I bring in, other young women. So I think intergenerational collaboration is extremely important for us, especially at UN system, at African Union system. We've been advocating for missions, on the ground to negotiation or to conflict settings, to have always young women and elder, whether men or women, in the mission. We've been advocating, I know, at the UN level for the youth delegates to be in General Assembly, same way for the African Union to be at the AU Summit. It's only with that we can start now speaking a language we both understand and start challenging each other. So for me, it's been really imperative that I pushed for generational spaces, and that I also kind of proved that it worked, because I experienced it myself. It's not, when we say intergenerational dialogue, it's not something abstract. It actually works. When people from different generations sit down and have an honest, candid conversation, mindsets change. A lot of them get inspired by what young people are calling for, and they go back to their space and they do influence their counterparts. So when I talk to head of state, what I'm expecting out of that conversation is that when you are having your small club of heads of states discussion, you remember at least what I said, and you take it seriously, and you influence others. So, and I think that's why we need a lot of young people in these spaces. So we are all saying the same thing in different spaces, and then now they have no choice but to listen.
Yeah, I very much like that safety in numbers approach, but also you've given us a lot of interesting insights there, particularly on the member state level, where we could see a greater role for youth. Now, Fleur, I just wanted to bring you in on this part and talk about the role for civil society. So do you foresee a greater embrace of youth actors, civil society leaders among the civil society community on these questions of youth advocacy, the role of women, the importance of women's rights? Do you see that kind of space opening up here in the Netherlands and abroad?
I mean, if I'm being honest, I think there is a lot of room for improvement still. A lot of the spaces that I'm in are, more conservative and centered around the powers that be, and in a traditional sense, because I think the power is moving to other places because we are more connected, but we're not all ready to give some things up or to open some doors to make space for that. So no, I don't see that very much yet. And I also think, responding to some of the things that you said, Christine, I think it's really important to think about what's going well. And I think one of the things that's going well is that there is a lot more space in advocacy and in word for the role of women and young people. But there's also a lot of tokenism. And this is now the next step, the next thing that we need to tackle. This now needs to become real. And that's also why I think these conversations and these connections are so important.
Yeah, super. I mean, this is I think you've said a lot of very important things there, and given us some good insight into the local environment here on these questions. I wanted to turn now to some of the questions that have been raised by our audience, both in the weeks coming up to today and what we've seen coming in over the chat now in the last couple of minutes. And the first one, I think I'll put it out to whoever might like to answer this, is how did you get to this role? So what advice would you give to young women who want to enter the peace and security field, either in civil society or on the national level, or like Christina has done at the UN? What was one piece of advice that you wish you were given when you were setting off down this road? Anybody want to take that?
I can go.
Please.
I get this question a lot because I also do a mentorship program, YFM, and whether it's peace and security, whether it's, any other field, I think the first thing to start with, the first thing I would have loved someone told me when I was 23 is find your identity, find your mission first. Why do you wake up every morning and what drives you before, trying to get to positions? Because it's not about positions, it's about serving. And you can start being passionate about climate change, and then you become passionate about migrants' rights, and then you become passionate about peace building. But you need to really find what really drives you. And I always tell young women in my program, your power is your radical self. Find it and liberate it, because also in the patriarchal society we live in, we're also conditioned to think, in a certain way as women. Oh, women cannot go to peace and security. Oh, no, women cannot study mathematics. Oh, women cannot do this and that. And sometimes maybe your passion, or what you think your passion is conditioned by what your society, the way you brought up, tells you. I mean, I grew up in a very Muslim conservative family on the northwest of Tunisia, and I was pushed to study science in school because all my family were engineers and teachers, and that was the path that I have to do. And I had to rebel. Obviously, I tried to fit in, so I studied that, and then after I graduated, I rebelled and I went to study international relations, completely different. Everyone said, what are you gonna do? What job you gonna have? And that was even under dictatorship. You can't even go into politics. And then after, I didn't know I could be a diplomat, right? I didn't study that to be a diplomat, but eventually that and with the revolution, and then with my activism across the continent, and then I went back to study African politics, it all eventually led to where I am today. But the position of the youth envoy didn't even exist when I found my identity and passion. So you never know what space you would occupy, as long as that space is where you can serve your mission. Everything you do is getting you closer to serving your mission. And so if you find your identity, who you are, like if someone asks me who you are, I'm a Pan-African feminist. That's who I am. And those two, for me, are interlinked. I can't be Pan-Africanist without being a feminist. And anyone who claims that being Pan-Africanist cannot claim being feminist. So it's my identity. And that's what I can debate about till morning. And once I found that, I wanted to do activism across the continent. And so I would take my pack bag. I had no money. I was unemployed for 2 years. And I would just go stay, you know, with whatever on any corner of the continent, and I would feel home, and I would train young people in blogging and mobilization. And that's how I built my network. And then after traveling on zero budget to 30 countries in Africa, I started building an African movement of all these inspiring people I met. And after building that movement, this position opened, and I already had a constituency on the continent. And I was like, okay, maybe I can represent the continent, even though I come from North Africa, which is the unexpected space to have someone represent Africa as a whole. But because of that journey, you know, I could feel, okay, I have value to bring to this space. I have been to everywhere on the continent, understand the issues. I am a bridge. I speak Arabic, French, English. I have Muslim background and so on. So, but if I didn't know what I want, what my mission is, what my identity is, I would not be able to stand in front of any minister or head of state or whoever and convince them that the issues I'm telling you about affect a Tunisian like it affects a Gambian, like it affects a South African. I'm speaking from the experiences of young people I know, I met, I lived with. And I think that's extremely important. So go back to basics, find your identity, define your mission, write that mission statement of where you want to do, and then all these, you know, UN spaces, AU spaces, whatever is the space, a community space, you know, international space, that is an avenue, a vehicle of change. So whatever you are, then you can, you know, feel completely fulfilled of what you are doing. So that's what I would say to young women.
Well, that's terrific advice. I mean, you've really lit a fire under a lot of the people today, I'm sure, not just by framing international relations as a career of rebellion, which I think a lot of people may not have thought of it before, but also in laying out, as you did for us quite nicely there, that it's not a linear career path, right? You don't just decide you want to do something and then it leads you down the road to success. I wanted to ask Christina and also Ferd to share some experiences of that. And could you tell us perhaps a time, Christina, that you've had a lot of different jobs within the UN system. Was there perhaps a time that you maybe had some doubts about whether or not this is what you wanted to do, or some major challenges that you might have faced? I mean, Aya has told us about her, she kind of found her identity and she took chances, right? So she gathered a constituency of support for her ideas. But in working within the UN then, what's the capacity or the space for that? Is it really all an elitist environment, or is there actually space for individual voices?
Yeah, thanks so much, Professor O'Malley. I'm glad to be the one following Aya, because I think she gave a tremendous introduction that I would have given as well, but not as good as she did. She did it perfectly. And I think what I would also say, related also to your question, Professor O'Malley, is that once you find that purpose, and everything seems impossible, meaning change seems impossible, meaning you studying at a certain university where you'd like to study despite you not having the economic possibilities to do so, or being able to go and travel as Aya did in 30 countries and have all these experiences that would be unimaginable, you can make that happen. And you can make that happen because there is a drive, and then that is followed by a discipline that comes after you find that purpose. So I think that's what happened to me also when I moved to the United States. I just told my parents that I wanted to study there, and that was it. They were not able to support me. I came to the United States with a 1-month rent, and that was it, basically. So I just had to build everything from the scratch. It was very difficult. It never really felt that overwhelming because I always saw ahead of the curve, which was me trying to have an impact in the world and try to really understand why in the 21st century we're still having conflicts. Of course, I was very naive at the beginning, thinking about a lot of the things that I could potentially change. Now I realize, no, you need a mass amount of people that can do that with you, and you need to empower others. In terms of the UN and the different positions that I've held in the different experiences, that also happens. I remember the first time when I arrived in New York, I passed the UN building, I looked at it, and I thought for a second, I will never be able to walk into that building. I'm too little for that. I really thought I was. And then afterwards, my mindset changed, thinking, okay, what are the pathways? What can I do in order to get there? And believe me, you are going to find the answers if you're really trying to get to that point. So I did have a couple of experiences within the UN, both in the field. I was with the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime in Guatemala, and also at the headquarters. I worked on youth issues while being at the UN, which was very enlightening. It is an elitist space. It is. I have to say that. But at the same time, I think the leadership is trying to create more spaces for civil society actors, local civil society grassroots actors, and also young people, of course, to come into these spaces. Now, the level of real, genuine, and candid engagement that happens in this policy forest, it's very, very much fluctuates, right? So I think that what happens is also what needs to happen at least is to try to first create the spaces and then try to understand what can be some of those entry points by which we can change mindsets. And then if you get to change the mindset of one member state, and that member state can then be your advocate within the policymaking fora, which is the General Assembly generally, or the Security Council, as a matter of fact, then you have better chances of advancing that. But then you need to have first the space so that you can have that voice inside. So yes, what I would say, and then I really hope that there's also men watching this, and because this is not only a women's debate, is also, it applies to men as well. And I think that what we try to say, and personally what I'm trying to do in my personal life, is really to explain men why we're still fighting for gender equality in a country, because I live in the United States, where most of the men believe that we don't have a gender equality problem because we're living in a developed country, and because things are a little bit better, then this means that this problem does not exist anymore. So here's a pin that I have, and I think that guided me throughout, and that it's "Fight like a girl." It says, you might not see it, it's a glove, a pink glove, says "Fight like a girl." So yeah, I would encourage everyone to do the same.
Super. I think that will be something that sticks with a lot of us. First, I wanted to talk to you about one aspect that Christina and I have both mentioned there, and that's really trying to facilitate the role of women who you're working with, right? And particularly given the nature of your work in dialogue, can you tell us some specific tricks or tools that you use to enhance the role of women that you work with in peace and conflict scenarios, and particularly trying to really realize the agency and the voice of women in these situations?
Yeah, thanks, Alana. I just want to say, I think what Aya and Christina said is great. And I just want to add to that, I think two things that are important. One is embrace a little bit of adventure. I find that, and maybe this is mostly the students that I encounter, they're wonderful, they're smart, and they're so focused. And that also means that you keep tight grip of something, right? And in many ways, I think that's wonderful and necessary because there's a dedication and a hard work. But also sometimes it comes at you in ways that you didn't expect. And you have to be in a frame of mind to embrace that kind of thing. And I think that is also about being reflective. And as Aya said, knowing what change means to you, because I don't think it's about necessarily getting to a specific position, but it's about the substance of it. So I think be reflective and creative and embrace the adventure, say yes, and get back up if you fall down. Don't be afraid of failure. I think we all I've faced a bunch of times where I fell on my butt and got back up. And I don't think it's about getting it right the first time or it being perfect. It's about keeping going and helping others. And that goes to your question, Alana. And I think, to be really honest, I work in a lot of environments where women are not visible. So I talk to many people who commit violence. Not many of them are women. And to political leaders, not many of them are women, although some are. And enhancing the voice of women in that context can be really difficult because our tables are small. So a lot of the time I find myself, and I don't want to embrace tokenism on the one hand, and on the other, you open a door in some way and maybe that does something as well. But I think my focus has been more on what the women that I have around me. So I work with a lot of women, or I encounter a lot of female students. And I don't want to exclude men in any way, because the importance is equal. But I think in giving them honest support and advice and hearing the people who I work with, who I manage or who I come across, I try to have an impact on that. But it's challenging, and that goes to my point of getting back up. Gotta get back up. It's the main thing.
I've got a kind of an excellent question from one of our student audience members, and it's a difficult one, it's a tricky one, and it's one that I very much want to hear the answer to myself. And she's asking, what do you do in a professional scenario when you feel undermined or overruled by your male colleagues? How do you react? That's a tricky one. Anybody want to jump on it? Christina?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's not because it happened to me. I'm very lucky to be in a place that really appreciates and strives for diversity, equity, and inclusion. But I think that speaks to my personality, which is a little bit more assertive. But I do tend to see also a lot of women who are not necessarily like this. We have different personalities. Some of us are more introverted, shy, especially when we are at the beginning of our career. We're afraid of doing the wrong thing because we are afraid that we are not going to be able to raise to the challenge, or to be that top performer that we're aiming to be, and that we're going to fail, which I think it's wrong, because there are many instances where you might be facing moral dilemmas and where you might be facing political challenges and have to navigate the system. And I think that goes back to the idea of having a core set of values and principles that you stick to no matter what. And that means that when you see an injustice happening, when you feel that you have been treated unfairly, or not, it doesn't have to be about you. You are witnessing an injustice. You have to speak up, and you have to do that. And believe me, no matter what the consequences are at that moment, they are never going to be as bad as you not being able to receive the kind of respect and be able to raise awareness of the things that, let's say, are provoking the injustice around you. So always speak up. Of course, tone matters, attitude matters, but never really, if you really feel that your values and principles have been infringed, then that's a red flag for you to speak up.
Yeah, thanks very much. So kind of keep your voice in the dialogue, even when you feel at times to be shouted out or stamped down. I think that's something to remember, that resilience, unfortunately, is still really necessary to hear women's voices, because in many scenarios it's still difficult to put them across. Let me just ask one final question from our audience, and that is, this is an extraordinary International Women's Day because everything is in this moment of pandemic. We hope the pandemic will eventually draw to a close and life will resume as normal. But what can we do in the meantime to keep women's rights and youth activism issues alive? So, I mean, beyond engaging on social media, how can people practice some of these rights and principles in their everyday lives to keep these campaigns moving on and to keep these questions at the forefront of our minds, despite the fact that we're all in this kind of extraordinary moment?
I actually think this is the moment to claim our rights, because we have been living for the past decades with inequality, with rising abuse, with all of these injustices and issues. But the pandemic came to say, actually, these things exist and you haven't been paying attention. It basically exacerbated the impact of this pandemic for us to be clear, like it's on your face. And if we don't take this momentum to make it actually an emergency and a crisis, then we're missing out. What the most scary statistics to me is when they say, if we don't move with the pace we need to move on gender equality, we would need 108 years to reach gender equality. And that's, for me, is like nonsense. Like, to me, already in 2021, for girls to drop out of school because of their period, it's nonsense. So let alone all of the other issues of unequal pay, of female genital mutilation, of child marriage, of all these issues, which I think gender-based violence is violence and should be part of peace and security discussion, because violence is not only in conflict and displacement and humanitarian violence, even in democracies, it's an everyday experience for women. So I think for me, it's not to think about how do we in the pandemic keep those things a priority, or bring those topics to the table. Actually, these are the topics, because we arrived to a pandemic, we couldn't handle it the way we should have handled it, we couldn't put the alarm early, we couldn't do an effective response because of structural issues of inequalities and violence and patriarchy. So isn't it time for us now to go back to those structural issues and fix them? If we're gonna continue with, quick fix of, oh, let's, yeah, we roll out a vaccine, and we distribute test kits, and this is a response, a temporary response, but are we prepared for the next pandemic? No, we're not. And if we do not go back now to these issues and pay attention and say, this is not working, the system is breaking down because of these structural issues, and it's not now affecting just me, the vulnerable one and the marginalized, even you, the rich countries, even you, the privileged, even you, the elitist, you're not gonna get away from a pandemic. So let us just work together, and fix it and have equality for all, because we have been shouting the past decade why we should have equality, why we should have peace, why we should be just and fair. But of course, the self-interest people and cooperation and states remain at their positions, and remain opposing to a world, a globalized world, a multilateral world that we live in, and they don't want to accept it. And I think this is what we have to do now with the pandemic, to really say that if you care only about profit above people, this is an economic cost. And if you care only about people and not planet, this is an environmental cost. And everyone who cared or didn't care now have to care about everything, because it's knocking your door and no one is safe until everyone is safe. And I really, really hope that out of this pandemic, we could come, whatever our differences is, to some consensus about the fact that we cannot continue to lead the world the way it is right now, and we need more women in leadership to have a better, peaceful, just world. And I don't want to be biased and say, look at the women leaders who managed the pandemic.
Yeah.
Statistics show that, facts show that they handle it better. I'm not saying it's because of their gender, but yes, female leadership is collaborative, is emotionally intelligent, is empathetic, and your response to the pandemic was not empathetic because of your masculine leadership. And so, yeah, let's not fight it. It's not a divide, but let's say, how do we get the qualities of everyone's leadership to have better leadership and not to fail us as millennials and as the next generation? Because if we're going to inherit this system which is not working, we might end up just perpetuating the same system. And we need to work together also across generations to do that. So I hope the young people who are listening to us to really get more engaged, get hands-on the issues, get back to the structural issues, challenge the leadership, challenge the spaces they are in. And as Christina said, raise your voice, be bold. And challenge. Sometimes it's not a choice when you are vulnerable, but there is always creative ways to do it. Just like patriarchy is very creative. We get harassed, one day, and you're like, now I know how to deal with it. I know how to claim my space. I feel good about this. The next day you get another thing and you're like, come on, patriarchy, again in a different phase and different shape. Yeah, we need to also be creative, just like all these oppressive systems are creative. And we have the tools. We have the innovation power. We have the demographic power. We have the youth-led accountability power. So don't estimate your power. Just get out there, mobilize, and speak up, because this is our future we're talking about.
Terrific. Well, yes, Fleur, did you want to add something?
It's very small, but all of the women and young people have been exceptionally affected by this pandemic in different ways, because you have care roles, because this crucial time in your life, you cannot go anywhere. So I think if there's one advice that I want to give you all out there dealing with this situation, it's really simple, but just make some space for yourself and take care of yourself a little bit, because God willing, we'll be a little bit more free at some point, and we need everybody to still be standing and keeping it going.
Good advice, and very important to remember, of course. I'm going to draw to a close now. Thank you so much to all of our panelists for that excellent insight, not just into their experiences and their careers as women leaders and as young leaders, but also the challenges to this, even in the 21st century. And I think we got a range of really stimulating, but also very practical advice about how to deal with these issues going forward. I wish you all on the panel and everybody that's listening a continued happy International Women's Day. And I hope that we've given you some food for thought from this discussion. You can find it later on YouTube, and so please come back to watch segments of it. I surely will be doing so. I think a lot of the questions that we've talked about will be relevant for the forthcoming years, not just the next couple of months. And also you're warmly invited then as audience members to come and join our networking event with Humanity Hub, which will take place at 3:15. And there you can network with some more peace and security, and also women activists who are located in the Netherlands and in The Hague. And it's online, of course, so you're welcome to join that. The link will be available in the chat box and also on Twitter. There's nothing left for me to say except, again, to thank our panelists and to really express our delight in being able to host you here. And I hope that maybe in the future we will be able to bring you all to Leiden University in person for an extended discussion of these important questions. Very best of luck in the rest of your work, and enjoy the rest of International Women's Day 2021. Thank you.